Hi everyone, I'm Johnny /Dr. Socrates from Neofix, and today I have a little tutorial about how we made the drum sounds in our most recent track, Perseverance, entirely out of samples taken from the surface of Mars by the Nasa Perseverance Rover. So this track is the first track to ever be made using only samples taken from Mars. You know, when we first heard these NASA samples, we were really excited to get to work on them. And we've had a few questions about how we actually did it. So I'm going to start by showing you how I went about turning these samples into the drum sounds that can be heard on our track. And I'll do some future updates and videos looking at how I went about making the bass and some synth sounds. So rather than sort of having a step-by-step tutorial and explaining how every plugin works, I'm going to give a more holistic overview of the creative side of the process and hopefully just give you some ideas about how you can tinker with sample-based music outside of instrument sampling to get really unique sounds that capture the essence of a specific environment. So in this case, Mars. I'll just like to take a moment to let you know that we're going to be releasing a ton of content like this. So please like, subscribe. We are open to suggestions for future content. So hop into the comments and let us know what you want to see more of. And hit the bell to keep up to date with our releases. Thank you. Okay, so first thing we're going to look at is how to make a kick drum. So I used this sample, which is the Martian wind captured by the rover on the surface of Mars, obviously. And then I loaded an instance of Simpler into a MIDI track. You crop the portion of sample that you think you might want to use and just drag it down into Simpler. Make sure you have Classic selected and then zoom in. So what we're looking for is a very small portion of the sample that kind of looks almost like a kick. So you want to have a bit of a transient bang up the top, and then you want it to taper off a bit later on. So this looks pretty good to me at the moment. Let's have a listen to what we have. Okay, so not exactly. Here, this one looks nicer. So that's sort of what you're going to want it to look like in the first instance. Then you got to move over to controls, make sure the filter is clicked on. And in this case, what I wanted to do is roll off some of the sort of air in the real top end and give a little boost around the 1 and 2K for a bit of extra click. So I've got my sample that I want. I'm happy with it. This was the exact portion of the sample that I actually used on the track. The next step is to do a bit of EQing. So I just loaded an instance of EQ8. I boosted some of the sub frequencies, dipped off around 100 Hertz onwards, boosted up again, and then tapered off. I also added a little bit of drive. So this is the Mani M distortion. It's a Waves plugin, but you can use any overdrive or saturation. I like this one because you can turn down the distortion level and keep the direct level. So once it acts as though it's a parallel processed distortion. All right, so at this point, what I did is record myself playing one MIDI note of the kick. And then I flattened it, went to freeze track, flatten track, and here you can see the audio file of our drum. What will be our kick? You can cut it to where you want it, because we are not done by any means with our processing. Under D&B, drum and bass, I have my drums and bass. So the next thing you want to do is insert a MIDI track, load up a drum rack, grab your sample and put it in where you want it. So I want it to trigger C2. So you get a instance of simpler within the drum rack essentially, and you can just sort of really make sure it's hitting at the right place. And now this is where the real magic happens. I will delete this drum rack and show you the processing I had on the one that I used. So here you can see is my kick, and here are the plugins that I used. So this one is the Cashmere Essentials kick. I use this to tune the sub-frequencies of my kick to F, which is the key of the song, boost them up. I added some mids, added a whole bunch of air. I boosted the transients. I used a bit of tape, which is more distortion essentially, and added some compression amongst other things. I then took the gain down a little bit with a utility. I used the Waves TransX transient shaper. Here I have the Aaron kick preset that I sort of started off with. I then added more parallel distortion, so I really cranked the SSL X saturator. I took the mix towards dry, so it just adds that sort of dirtiness underneath the dry signal. Fab filter, once again, really boosting those lows, dipping in the mids and around 500 hertz, boosting again for that nice click around 1 to 2K. And then I left a bit of a high shelf, just so we can hear this kick when we're listening to on phones and other speakers that don't have very good bass reproduction. I added some compression, and I added one final EQ just to do a little bit of sort of more, I guess you would call it surgical EQ, perhaps. I'm a pretty crap surgeon though. And this is what you get. So it's a pretty filthy bass drum, which is precisely what I wanted for this track. I wanted it to be dirty, distorted, almost like a lo-fi vinyl feel. You know, kind of just feeling Mars, the sort of desolation, this idea of data and sound traveling all the way from Mars back to Earth, the way it's distorted, the way it changes, and that's what I tried to capture in the construction of this kick. So with the snare, I did the exact same thing, except I started with this sample this time, which is the actual fluid pump of the Mars rover, and it sounds like this. So the reason why I like that is because it has that kind of rattling, white, noisy sound that you expect to hear when you listen to a snare drum. I put the snare through that same simpler process. So I chose the bit that I wanted, I did a bit of EQing, and then I flattened the track and I moved it into my drum rack. So this is the snare here. This is how I cut it. I added a bit of a fade at the end there just to avoid any clicking. I once again used a transient shaper. This time I started with the more punch preset. Sometimes when I'm working creatively, I like just to dive into some presets and do minor tweaks, just so you can sort of, as efficiently as possible, get that sound that you're after. Because when you're working with sort of samples from the real world or other real worlds or planets, sometimes you really want to just put that creative flow first. I imagined that sci-fi 80s gated reverb sound. So once again, I have the Waves H reverb, that 80s snare preset. I did a bit of tweaking, and that gave me the sound I wanted. So the snare sounds something like this. So that came out really nice. And I just did a bit of reverbing, cutting off the low ends and boosting between 2K to just above 5K. With the snare, I also ran a track in parallel. So I just duplicated my drum track. I muted the kick. And on this snare, I removed the reverb. And I just put a H delay, another Waves plugin, playing 1/8 notes, fully wet. And it sounds like this. And when you hear that within the context of the full drum track, you get this. The last part of my drum rack is the hi-hats. I left the hi-hats separate. They are straight into simpler. I actually used a portion of the same sample that I had used for the kick, so that's this one. And I used one of the earlier bits, so that you get a few little like clicks and pops. So this is the bit I use for the hi-hat. As you can hear, it's almost like a chime-like sound. So you're searching for sounds that are already something resembling what you want that final sound to look like. And in a way, you want sounds that can actually inspire the final sound. So I put it into simpler. I cut it as normal. This time I actually transposed it up 7 semitones. Whenever I'm doing hi-hats, I love to use this random pan effect. So I've got it up at 33%. And what that means is that when you're hearing the hi-hat, it's just going to pan about. I ran it through the RC20 for some nice lo-fi vibes. I used a kind of broken distortion. I did a bit of fab filter, so really cutting off the lower mids and the low end. And then I used Ableton 11's brand new hybrid reverb. So I just chucked it on and had a listen, and I liked what I heard. And this is the sound of the hi-hat that I got. So once again, a really nice sound. And the drums all together sound like this. So this is just a bit of an overview of my process and how I go about using non-instrument samples to create instruments. So in this instance, I really tried to let the initial vibe of those sounds guide where I went with it, rather than trying to create a kick that sounds like an 808. So I went for a nice dirty, distorted, alien sounding kit, and I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. In the context of the whole song, this is what we have. Not bad, eh? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please chuck us a like. Feel free to jump into the comments. Let us know what you thought about this tutorial. Let us know if there's anything you would like further clarification on. And feel free to make suggestions for future content. In our upcoming videos, we're going to be looking at how I made the synths out of the Martian samples, as well as the bass. And in about a month's time, we're going to be releasing a new song and film clip, which were made entirely with samples from around the house, and the film clip shot entirely within our block as well. So we're going to be releasing some videos coming up to show you how you can get creative within your very own home space and transform it into something interesting and artistically meaningful. So please like, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you guys on the other side.